by Fritz Lang, 1931 classic film. Uh, Obviously made by one of the best filmmakers of all time, generally considered one of the best movies ever made, and I can't help but agree. It's probably my fourth time watching it, and it really just gets better and better, and we're just going to dive into it. And I'm actually going to let David take the lead on this one here. I want to know your initial thoughts on the film.
So when I first started out watching this, it's set in black and white, and there are moments throughout where there's just no sound. So it's sort of a half silent film, half sound, and they have so much experimental sound going on throughout the movie. What's beautiful and poignant about this entire piece, this whole movie, is it just sets the pace very early on with the Hall of the Mountain King was the whistle in the very beginning. And it's portraying the villainous act of the main character. I just find it so surreal and just so amazing how a film of this caliber just encapsulates in just that alone. And a lot of people, they know Hall of the Mountain King and the sort of whistly, and then it just kind of goes on and on from there, and then a build-up and a crescendo, and it's just tumultuous, really. And I just love that. I just love that feeling throughout the whole movie. It's just edge of your seat thriller the whole way, and it's just loaded with symbolism and it's all set in Germany in this time period where there's this propaganda and Nazi Germany is on the rise, and the Third Reich is just going through all of this cinematography and radio and just making sure that their agenda is made known. And I want to get clear and say that Fritz Lang, he was so against this movement, and it's just so clear. And that's what makes it such a brilliant piece. But I just want to just deconstruct this and really break it down and just start with the basics of everything. And I just wanted to ask you, Zach, about the just the whole process. You had a lot of thoughts about this, and you've watched this many times,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So what I find just beautiful about this is just how I wanted to rewatch the beginning. I told you that before.
I know. I was wondering why. What at that point made you want to see the beginning again?
What I wanted
We're about
to see,
halfway through.
halfway through, I wanted to see the beginning again, and that was actually because right at the moment when the investigators were trying to get onto the trail of the murderer.
Right.
Right.
You're
Laurie,
you're asking
right. The main character, Laurie.
Yeah,
right.
Hans Becker, played by Peter Lorre, and one of
Mhm.
the best performances ever graced the 30s cinema. But yeah, it was right at the point where, for some reason, Fritz Lang made the point of reference or significance in the camera blurry, the trash can.
Yes.
And that was directly when you wanted to watch the beginning. So why did you want to watch the beginning right at that moment where he made his frame of reference blurry and then quickly switched it to the focus to
What's
fix?
beautiful about this is how much foreshadowing happens throughout the movie. At the very beginning of the movie, in the first 10 minutes, the killer, Laurie, Hans Becker, he is talking to the young girl Elsie, and it shows his shadow on the poster of the wanted sign.
And it starts
of
off
him.
with the little girl's ball
Yes.
bouncing back and forth,
It's-
then the
that just-
shadow,
wow.
and it's perfect.
That wowed me, that moment. And I just knew that he was the killer just by that alone. And that was just so great. And even if you were to just look at it from the surface value
I think
of that.
filmmaking is a very pure and very concentrated and careful thing to do properly, because film is supposed to be mostly visual, with sound used as a tool to aid along the kinetic visual images. And that is kind of like the perfect, what we just described there with the ball at the wanted poster followed by Laurie's shadow is a perfect example of getting across the most amount of visual communication through, expressed only in images and in one solid image with several different symbols colliding into one. And you mentioned earlier that it was a very early film in sound. It was Fritz Lang's very first sound movie, and it's fascinating to see movies made from about 1929 to 1935, back when they didn't exactly know the best use for sound, and they were using it more as a technique and as a tool than as something that has become passe now or cliche. Sound is just kind of arbitrary now, whereas as we see in M, it's a definite tool.
Absolutely.
To pronounce, to enunciate, to really highlight certain situations
and the themes. Oh my goodness!
And within the first
themes.
5 minutes, I forgot what the piece was called that he was whistling. You gave the title earlier.
Hall of the Mountain King.
Hall of the Mountain King. He creates maybe cinema's first sound motif within the first 5 minutes, and that plays such a crucial element throughout the rest of the movie.
And so many movies have built off of that alone, and that's just so great about it. Is just looking into the Hall of the Mountain King and knowing about that. It was set during the Romantic era of music, and he uses that and he sublimates that into a kind of a horror.
Exactly.
And that's what's so brilliant
There's
about
something
it.
so whimsical about the melody.
So getting back to that blurred trash can.
Of course.
That inspector, he was looking into Hans Becker, or Laurie's main character, the villain. He was looking into his entire living quarters. And, this is set in 1931 Germany, so they have, antique, artistic, there's just the cloth on the table is just set in that, they have candle lighting on the walls, and they have just piano and, just an antique piano off on the side, and then they have that wooden table in the middle. And the main premise of him investigating is that they're seeing the scripts written from the villain, Hans Becker, and he's writing to the press in red pencil on a wooden table. And that's why they're even in his house looking.
Yes.
And so that moment, that still was another foreshadowing. When it blurred at that particular moment, it foreshadowed to me that they were in fact on the right trail, but they had lost focus. And that's why it blurred. Right. And because later on, it showed that in the film, that it was not in fact the wooden table, because the investigators thoroughly and just rigorously looked over that wooden table, took off the cloth, took a magnifying glass to it, looked for the pencil markings on that table. Flawless. The table was just unscathed. No evidence whatsoever. And then that blurred scene showed that it was not in fact the table, but the wooden windowsill, which the killer, Hans Becker, was writing those notes to the press. And that's why Fritz Lang made that blurred scene just then.
It's a movie of such complexity, both visually and orally, that I believe that every scene most likely has just, like I said, an incredible amount of information is being expressed in the purest possible way, the purest cinematic possible way. Like, I guess in the scene where they're doing that little roundup or that surprise raid on the criminal establishment, and I believe the bartender is kind of speaking for the morality of the picture of like this is the wrong thing to do, and the policeman who she's speaking to, the camera angle is askewed because his perspective is off, or it's completely uncaring or apathetic, whereas hers, when it's flipped back to hers, was completely fixed and level. We get things like that all the time, like that just
just awkward angles for the camera.
Propel a deeper meaning through visuals and through sound. The best example of framing, obviously, is when Hans Becker is looking through the window of the shop and his face is outlined in the reflection of knives, and then you see the would-be prey, the girl he's kind of stalking, and she is outlined in the actual knives itself that's reflecting against the mirror that he's looking at. I mean, how much information is being displayed there poetically and symbolically and literally.
And it's just so beautiful because the killer, Hans Becker, actually uses knives.
Yes.
And so he's pulling this little 1930s switchblade out of his, coat pocket. He's dressed like a kind of like a mafia boss almost.
Almost, yes.
Yeah, and he's just pulling this out of his pocket, and he's cutting open an orange. And I just love how the very title and the picture that they used for the film itself is the M. And at that moment, that's when the cartel is on his case.
Yeah, on his trail.
And what's beautiful about that is how the cartel symbolizes something greater, a greater theme that's happening. And I'll get that into the more details of the themes later, but I just want to just point out just the surface of everything and how it just gets deeper and deeper into everything else that Fritz Lang is trying to portray in this movie.
I guess a few of the other early symbolic elements I wanted to bring up was that I noticed this time around, as opposed to all the other times I watched it, was when we first see the criminals organizing for presumably a heist, where Der Schranker, the safecracker, magnificent character when he first enters, the guy who's synchronizing all the watches. Like, I think this time around I realized that he was the great synchronizer of the film, because while he's doing that, Long cuts back and forth almost in some sort of juxtaposition between the criminals deciding that they are going to go after the child murderer and the policeman kind of figuring out how to be competent in catching the child murderer. And the synchronizing of the watches, which he has several, and he even calls the operator to get the correct time, is just almost a literal metaphor, or like and Antonioni did this all the time. But yeah, literal metaphors of, like, Antonioni would do, like, if someone's transitioning, like, as a character, he'd show the character driving under a bridge or like an overpass, like actually changing or going through something. Like, it's that kind of literal metaphor, because we see the safecracker again when they're hunting him down in the storage building, and he's synchronizing time once again, but he's desynchronizing the watches. So he's telling them when the cops will be there. So he's one is synchronizing two police to the apparatus working together, and the other is a desynchronization of we are no longer within the same operation. Like, this is our operation now, and we are taking over.
So lots of spoilers ahead.
Oh yeah.
You have to watch this before you
the whole
listen.
thing's going to be spoiled. And the last note I had here was: did you mention that when you were talking about the Mountain King and Gerg or
Grieg?
Grieg.
Yeah.
Did you mention that he was a nationalist?
Yeah, he's a Norwegian nationalist. Grieg is the composer for Hall of the Mountain King, which is the piece that is being whistled by the main villain, Hans Becker.
And perhaps just explain why his nationalism plays a key.
So this is one of the key themes, and this is the first theme that you see throughout the movie piece, and that is the music and the sound being portrayed. And throughout the movie, there are moments of just pure silence, and even in moments where you pointed out, where there should be sound, where there's motorcycles and cars passing by, and there's this raid and this heist going on, and they're trying to search for the child murderer.
It's more than silence. It's nothing.
It's nothing, and it's just that silence just draws you in and really just makes it that much more and
very tactile
rapturing.
Use of it.
Absolutely. And the theme of that nationalist, the Hall of the Mountain King by Grieg, is pointing to the time period and the rise of the Third Reich, which I mentioned earlier, and Fritz Lang was against the rise of the Third Reich, and he was against the rise of Nazi Germany, and he is using that crescendo of Grieg and his nationalist agenda as a Norwegian to show how that is prideful. And that gets into the other element of the cartel and how the cartel wants to be the court of law to determine what is right and what is wrong. And that plays into an even greater overtone of what is justice. And that is all throughout the movie.
Right, because it starts off as a fascinating paranoia piece, but it expands to something
it's
far more symbolically.
It's even noir in a way. Just the horror of it all. And it's just so wonderful.
1 second. Sorry about that, but we are back. And just before we jump into the symbolism, which I know that David's dying to jump into, if you listen to the Persona podcast, which I'm actually probably haven't because I have to re-upload it, but if you followed us on our previous podcast, the Filmaholics Anonymous, we really dived into Persona, and you can tell that David was more of a symbolism person, and I viewed it strictly from a technical perspective. And those are two very good films to look at technically, because I think that the amount of information, like we've already gone over some of the information that's displayed from a purely technical level. I think Long might even do it more efficiently than Bergman did. Just want to talk about the overall, just simple structure of M, how the narrative unfolds itself, because I've never seen this before. It's part procedural, but it's also part, it almost reflects the diagrams that the criminal underworld is looking at all the time. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very, it feels by the book, but it's a very deranged, unsympathetic, uncaring book. It is a cold universe that he has created. It's a dark universe full of shadows and beautiful light.
And the seriousness of it all.
The seriousness of it all. And the fact that we really aren't given a main character. They kind of change off and on between Der Schranker, Safecracker as his moments, Inspector Lohman, who appears in a couple Fritz Lang films. I don't think this was his last German film. I think he made another one called Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which is kind of frightening and spooky, and Inspector Lohman appears in that one as well. And Peter Lorre, of course, gets his time to shine as the murderer himself. But narratively, we aren't given one clear voice of narrative to associate ourselves with. We're given multiple different people.
And that plays into the theme. That absolutely does.
The overall theme. So is the main character of this piece just simply the apparatus? Just simply... It's all like the main character of the piece is the story itself. It is the multiple factions of the story. Maybe it's the apparatus that is the main character. Because we are watching it from a point of view, but it's a galvanized point of view. It's often splintered.
Yes.
But sometimes it is synchronized, as we've gone over earlier as well. So it's a really fascinating structure, because it doesn't even build the way a suspense or serial killer. By the way, it's the first serial killer film ever. So I think there's something fascinating there about the structure of the film. Because even the intense scene, and there are moments of pure intensity when Peter Lorre is trying to escape through that door, and then he notices it's being opened from the other side.
And then he's also desperately in that moment using his broken switchblade that he had tried to use to escape earlier.
And like I said, I'm so Freudian. I thought that when he broke the knife, it meant castration. But in the same token, or in the same respect, Long puts quite a few roadblocks or bumps in the way of pure suspense in that scene. It's not pure suspense. It's way too tactilely efficient for it to be suspense. Because then we see still life or tableau images after the fact that really make it just seem like an event that took place rather than some kind of cinematic peak. And it's not even the climax of the film. The climax of the film is the kangaroo court.
Yeah.
There are so many roadblocks in the way to make this a pure suspense film that it's almost genreless in a way as well.
So I want to get back on track and just point to the themes of things.
Let's do that. That'll help us understand the structure.
Right. So the structure of what's happening here, and I love that you use the word galvanized. I think that's just so poignant right now to what we're talking about. What Fritz Lang is really doing is he's trying to make it estranged in certain moments, and to have the audience who's watching his film, and the moments where the cartel or the kangaroo court and all of that, they're for a lack of better words, they're cruel, they're capricious in a way. And he's trying to point that, and
there's something charismatic about the safecracker.
Absolutely. And what's beautiful about that is he's making the audience estranged in those moments, and he's getting away from the themes in order to.
He plays so rough with your sensibilities and sympathies.
It's almost like if you were a sailor on the seas and you were in a submarine, and you're on the surface of things, and that's the moment where it's beautiful and poignant, and you can see everything, and the crescendo of the waves and the sun and the clouds, and everything makes clear sense.
Long himself is unfair with his sensibilities.
And then right when you get to that moment where you think you have it, you just get submerged into the depths of the movie, and that is just so Fritz Lang, so him. What's great about that is we find out later that he is what am I trying to... He was interviewed by Mein Goebbels, right? And this was after the movie had come out, and he was being almost interrogated by Goebbels and he was terrified for his life. And this was during the time when they started to suspect that Fritz Lang was against the Third Reich movement,
Right.
and that's why they were even near interrogating him. They're coercing him into talking about his movie, and he had to defend himself in the way he could. And what's beautiful about that is that's why he was using those estranged moments, because he wanted it to the public, to the people who are looking at it from the surface level, just be this sort of this mob
Right.
classic. And in the reality, there's this whole underwater, this sort of subconscious thing going on.
Where if someone like the Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels himself,
And
was
they
looking
found out
for,
about it, they would just, and we would not know
if he
about
was
it.
looking for symbolism, we were talking about how it would almost be a bait and switch, because he would have the real symbolism or the real context right underneath the obvious one. It'd be more oblique, it'd be right beneath it, though. He would have a bait symbolism, but he had the real one right underneath it. It was very multifaceted and intelligent in that way.
Yes.
It works on several different levels, even several subtextual levels. Because the first subtextual level, I think, is the artificial one, and then you go underneath it, then you find the real one, which is anti-Third Reich.
Yeah.
But the first one you find is really just symbolism of a town paranoid and doesn't know what to do about justice.
Right.
If you go beneath that, then you get the true meat of the tale.
And the true meat of it is, I think there's like almost really like 3 or even 4 levels of what's happening. And
they go deeper than what I did, yeah.
So a lot of this is happening during Germany, and this is when a lot of existentialist philosophers have begun developing their thought, and has already become aware and has started to enter public consciousness. So a lot of Nietzsche especially, and you can kind of get that feeling that Nietzsche-esque, where it's just like it's despair, and then you have who else? Well, I guess Beauvoir, but she's more French. But
Beauvoir wasn't as nihilistic, though. She definitely had purpose in the heart.
Right. But you get sort of that Ubermensch kind of.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, but you get it from
way more from. Let's just leave it at Nietzsche. Really.
Yeah. Right.
I don't want to. I would never put Beauvoir in a Nietzsche boat.
Yeah. They're definitely complete. But it's a good contrast because it's the antithesis of it in a way.
Yes.
So in this existentialist paradigm that's happening, what we're seeing is the culture of despair that is happening, and that is from the irrationality of the crowd. And this is why I even brought up Nietzsche, is because that kangaroo court at the end of the whole movie is that symbolism of the crowd, the irrationality of murder.
That's one of the most amazing scenes in movie history, because your allegiances, and that's what I'm saying about him being so unfair, along with your sympathies and sensibilities, that your allegiances shift like 4 different times in that one scene.
Yeah.
Because in it, you want to see that guy pay, but holy shit, this is the first time Peter Lorre is talking. So then Lorre is given an amazing monologue that he does, that he articulates so much emotion and pathos into, so much is mined out of that monologue he gives, that you're suddenly on his side, especially when he's being bullied by the crowd. All of a sudden you're on the child murderer's side. And then you start to lose sympathy with him, and then you gain it with the voice of justice, the real voice of justice, not the blind man at the beginning who initially condemns him, but as you pointed out, as a defense attorney. You're immediately on his side. And you found yourself, because you've already built a relationship with Der Schranker, the safecracker, who is like the leader of this criminal underworld. You find yourself every time he opens his mouth relating with him as well, as you've already built a relationship with him. And because what he's saying isn't incorrect either.
Right.
If you want to be more absolutist, more frigid in your belief system of justice, you're with him as well.
Right.
That's 4 different times, or 5, that your allegiances shift through one contained scene.
How long was that scene? Was it 8 minutes?
It might have been 8 minutes tops, and it was amazing.
Yeah, you just open up in that scene where the 2 bouncers are behind Peter Lorre's character, and they throw him into this sort of this abandoned warehouse, which is the basement of the whole thing, and it's just breathtaking. Absolutely. You just get this sort of this landscape scene where it just starts off with just 1 person, and then 2, and then 8, and then
Yes.
16, and then 30, and then 100, and then hundreds, and it becomes this sort of this multitude of criminals.
And even the ending when the cops finally come to break up the court, you don't even need to show the policemen because just by their reactions and them stopping and putting their hands up, and it's hilarious that the safecracker is the last one to put his hands up in mock defiance. It was a mock court essentially too, so that's interesting as well. That paradigm or parallel. But oh my god, that scene itself as the climax of the film was just perfect.
I love how he, Peter Lorre's character, I mean, he's trying to plead his innocence, acting like in the very beginning of it all, he's just this random guy, and then the blind man, of all the people, the blind man just grips his shoulder. Yeah. I just found that so, I laughed internally. Just
well, that's the ultimate payoff of the motif.
Yes.
And
it's just like, it's the motif is just justice is blind, and then that just sort of transfigures and
but in
Fritz
that case, justice isn't only blind, but it's wrong.
Yeah,
it's unjust.
Right,
and that's a real because that's what we're talking about the bait and switch.
Yeah,
of the symbolism. Because if you want to see the symbolism, you'd stop there. You wouldn't keep waiting for the defense attorney to come along as well, or pay attention to the complicated ways that Long is playing with your emotions and your allegiances as well throughout that entire scene.
Certainly.
That's just incredible, and that's how it slipped past the censors. And I think it's a remarkable, fascinating document of rebelling against the Third Reich system.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I just love how well he does that. How he just submerges you into that sort of. It's just like it's right there. No, it could be. Is it a mob? No, is it a mob classic? No.
What did you think of this decision to never focus on the mothers of the victims or the families of the victims, those actually affected until the final scene, of course?
So, that is so tragic. So the movie ends in such a tragic, just a bleakness of it all, and that's to me what brings out that sort of the existentialist feel to the whole thing, is that sort of that absurdist despair where you have to sort of take it for what it is.
Yes.
How horrifying that is to have your child murdered and to see the faces of those mothers, how they're just completely dressed in black with the cowls and the beads. And everything about them just is riddled with it.
And it's not only Long who's virtually uninterested in sharing their experiences.
It's three ladies sitting on a bench, yeah.
Not only is he uninterested through the 2-hour film of giving them any kind of screen time to express their feelings, but the police are uninterested, the criminal organization, everyone else is uninterested, and you, by proxy of the film structure and situation, are uninterested in hearing what they have to say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
As well.
So what was it that they said? I mean, obviously it's all spoken in German, but
she basically says like almost like a "what about us" concept. Like we need to look out for our children. Like
what about the children?
And Long
always
really demonstrates these are the ones who are truly affected. The few. There's 3 crying mothers on a bench.
And it's so sad. It's really just despairing and tragic. How
that this spectacle has been like pushed up by all these people who aren't truly affected by the situation. And the ones that are were never asked how they felt, never asked what kind of justice they were seeking.
Right. And that is, to me, the eternal truth of despair and absurdism in philosophy, is how we must face the eternal truth of the absurd by ourselves. And that is where the symbolism of that existentialist comes in, where it shows us that we are left to face with our sort of our mortality, our mortal coil. And that is shown through the lens of the mothers and their loss. And that's just so tragic. And it just shows us that what Fritz Lang's done in that particular scene is he's saying that that's kind of the end of it. It's the bleakness.
Exactly. It's such a haunting scene. That scene stuck out to me the most when I first watched it when I was like, I don't know, probably 17.
I mean, I had to hold back so many tears. So many tears. I just wanted to cry so bad.
It's interesting how Long can even mine comedy concepts out of some of these scenes as well. But I know that after he made Testament of Dr. Mabuse, I believe that's when he fled to America. I mean, which he waited a while. He waited maybe a little bit too long for comfort. I know it was probably a little tense when he had to come over here.
No doubt.
He made mostly B pictures, but he made a phenomenal noir starring Glenn Ford, calling The Big Heat, which is amazing. I wish Criterion would get their hands on The Big Heat, and also Ministry of Fear is another gem. But early on, he's best known for making silent epics like Siegfried and Metropolis. Did you see any sort of parallels between Metropolis and M, his two most recognizable films?
They're so different.
They are so different, but you can tell more than auteur theory that they're by the same director.
Right,
they share certain themes.
Okay, so what I find interesting about Metropolis is throughout the entire movie. I mean, obviously this is a podcast about M, but I think this is a good contrast, is what I'm saying. In the movie Metropolis, you sort of have this element of the Savior and the Messiah sort of going all throughout, and they're like trying to look for the Messiah, and they're seeking out the Messiah. And contrast to this in M, you don't have that at all. No. You have the crowd.
You're right. It's good for contrast because somehow, not that Metropolis was the most warm science fiction film ever,
right?
But there was still life in it,
right?
M is like very cold and it's very calculated. It's just as calculated as the apparatus. It's so calculated and it's so precise. You can tell it was dictatorially directed. Like, I don't think anything happened accidentally in that movie. I think everything was framed to a T,
right?
Like minutely and almost with a superhuman obsession on the part of Long to get that kind of structure down. When contrasted to Metropolis, is more. It was focused on fantastic elements, and it was aware that it was a fantastical film. M is also aware that it's a very different kind of picture.
Yeah, and that's what's just so beautiful about his abilities and how he is able to really push the limits of even his own directing methods. And Metropolis is completely silent.
Yes.
And in contrast to that, M is the sound just brings that much more depth.
That much more. It brings depth. It doesn't bring clutter. Which is also really interesting. A lot of American films made the mistake of, when first incorporating sound, making it kind of clutter pictures. Early Cagney gangster films are kind of a victim of this, like The Public Enemy, this clutter of sound, whereas the Europeans, like Carl Theodor Dreyer and Fritz Lang in particular, with like Van Pure and M, use sound so well, so perfectly. I can't stress enough how well the tool of sound is incorporated into this film, and therefore into cinema itself. Like, this is the way I think sound is supposed to be used.
Do you remember when they're going through the whole raiding and the heist of everything, and they've finally captured Hans?
Yeah.
They show the still shots of the aftermath, and that aftermath is foreshadowing the loss of the mothers in a way. Because what they're showing is how much is required of justice to get to the bottom of it. And ultimately, what you're seeing is, even though the mothers never recuperate their losses because they can't, what we're seeing is how much other people truly do care about justice, and how they're willing to go through that length of search.
And I would think that their structure cares just as much about justice as anyone else, just as a...
Right, and it's a twisted sense of justice, and that's what gets into the whole Nazism and the National Socialist of it, is how the Nazis had a twisted sense of justice, and that's why they were going after the Jews. And this is what Fritz Lang was pointing to. Was
that's a perfect way to get your story past the censor, because his lamb to the slaughter was a child murderer.
Right.
Like.
And so who would censor that in their right minds?
Exactly. Like, so how could you possibly think he'd be making a film where sympathies are supposed to be directed towards a child murderer? That would be absurd.
And so I wonder if Fritz Lang was even playing even the leaders of the Reich, and showing them even their own capriciousness in that sense.
That's why it had to be so carefully put together.
Yeah.
Like, that's why I don't think any part of it was an accident.
I mean, we're speculating here.
Well, Goebbels wasn't an idiot.
Yeah.
He had to be smart enough to get past an entire legion of people waiting to pick it apart because, after he made Metropolis, he was viewed as a premier artist of German Expressionist art. They knew to look at his film carefully, more carefully than with other people.
Wow, it's just...
Like
what a film.
Murnau was given the same kind of treatment. Like, more carefully. Gotta look carefully.
Yeah, and there's just so much more to it, but I just want to end with this and just say, you have to watch it again. That's why I wanted to rewatch that scene at the very beginning, because of that particular still where he's writing the paper on the windowsill and then they get the blur halfway through, because there's just so much I'm sure I missed, and it's just nothing short of a masterpiece.
Oh, definitely. And an American filmmaker definitely shares the same kind of sensibilities. Probably be like King Vidor. Of course, I'm thinking of The Crowd. Kind of reminds me of this very much. The Crowd's a lot more melodramatic than that. There are so many things about M that we can talk. We can talk about this movie for literally hours and just
really
bore everybody to death. But there are certain things that we really want to get across, as we haven't really seen it mentioned anywhere else. For instance, in the Kangaroo Court itself, Peter Lorre's Hans Beckert, it's the first time he's actually talking, and he's emoting like a wounded animal. And he's kind of mining pathos out of like a familiar caricature of a very famous person that we might know as the Führer himself, as Hitler.
Right.
I got several different distinctive Hitler-esque qualities, but in caricature form. And of course, it could escape past the censors that's coming out of a child murderer's mouth, so it just sounds so desperate and wounded. But the way that he's enunciating his words, spacing them out, then jumbling them together all in like barbaric yops, is really reminiscent of Hitler in his defense. People laughing at him.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't know. You want to expand on this for me?
I do, and I want to just revisit that Kangaroo Court and how they laugh not only at him, but also at the voice of reason.
In equal proportion.
In equal proportion. That is really phenomenal. And that Fritz Lang did that.
And of course, the voice of reason, who has to be his defense attorney, is a criminal like everyone else.
Certainly.
He's one of them.
Well, I think that's just true to the nature of humans and the human condition.
Definitely.
Yeah, so what I find interesting about that, and I did point to you did point to that that is like Hitler-esque almost. This is the moment in which Hitler is rising to power and his speech is happening, and then the defense attorney literally says that don't make any fancy speeches, literally paralleling and making that subliminal message. No,
what is it about fancy speeches that that mobs hate? What is it about those?
What do you mean?
Like, how did he ruin himself by making the impassioned speech? Like, what is...
It's almost like
inherently wrong about that. I'm trying to figure that one out.
Well, he did a confession, ultimately.
Yeah, he definitely did. But he knew he was...
And he was pleading insanity,
and I want to make this point clear that Long... He wanted us to be sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the killer.
Right.
That he was the killer, that he didn't make a mistake. It would have been a very different movie if they were prosecuting an innocent man or a man that we didn't know was the killer. He made it very clear that he was the killer.
Absolutely.
Very clear point of no doubt, which is brilliant. Thank you for not adding an unneeded level of complexity to this situation. It makes it even more sophisticated and nuanced. So I just wanted to point that out. So we definitely know it's him, and he's even pleading with the audience, too. I think at times he's looking directly into camera, even, pleading with the audience. And your sympathies do change just based on the raw pathos and talent
the emotive expression.
The emotive expression of his talent. That's where true German expressionism is. It's in the shadows, and it's in his Peter Lorre's performance.
It's all riddled on his face, the bug eyes and the sweating.
But what about it am I pulling Hitler from, do you think?
Where I'm pulling it from and what I'm seeing about it is is just how he speaks,
Yeah,
and
like a
the way
caricature
in which
almost.
he
Yeah.
curls his knuckles when he's talking about his
He
pathology.
does.
And he's just there, and he's gripping his chest, and he's just in this sort of a I can't help it, I can't help it kind of, but I want to, but I can't help it, and he's just like sort of this almost bipolar. He's not bipolar, he's something else, but it's pathological, and he is insane ultimately. And that's where it's paralleling Hitler, is because Hitler, there's a lot of people who will say, Hitler was this antisocial, or they'll put a label on his personality, but ultimately Hitler did a lot of drugs, and that is well known. And he did, I think he did meth, or at least in an earlier form of it.
An antiquated version.
Yeah, an antiquated version. And a lot of his sort of lunacy came from that. And that's kind of what I find interesting, is how, I don't know if Fritz Lang was even aware of that. I don't think he was. But it was more like he was seeing the surface
Well, that's
value
the way he
of
acted.
right. He was seeing the surface value of Hitler's impassioned speech, and what I saw, and how I saw that was in my connection with that, with the Fuhrer, was how he was like talking about his struggle, just like how the Fuhrer talks about his struggle. That is what Mein Kampf literally translates into, my struggle. And that's what just made it so poignant for me, and what really brought it to the surface.
And it's that kind of grammar, film grammar, that could easily slip by the censors, but I doubt that any regular German citizen missed the parallel that Long was drawing there from that situation.
Right.
Because I almost feel like the censors would be too, like I said, too perplexed or hypnotized by the bait and switch concepts that he just used before that speech. But there comes a point where it's undeniable.
Yeah, there does come a point where it's undeniable. And it just sort of starts off with the idea of, in the very beginning, where they have the wanted posters everywhere. And that just sort of sets the tone.
The first thing you see in the entire film is almost like a Ring Around the Rosie song, but it's about being killed by the child murderer. And it sets the mood, the detached, estranged mood of Fritz Lang. You even get the question if Fritz Lang isn't a very romantic or even sentimental filmmaker at all. He's not very warm. So you get the question of how much he actually cares about the situation. I don't really think it's a narrative and thematic choice, and a strong one, not to show the family that's been affected, the families that have been affected by all the child killings. It's a strong narrative choice that pays off in the final scene of the film, but I also don't think Long was at all interested either. Because I don't think he has a sentimental note in his orchestra. I don't think he does.
Well, I mean, you do see a little bit of his sentimentality when it comes to the mothers.
But that's the last scene, and that's less than 5 seconds of screen time.
Certainly.
Of course, it's what he leaves you with.
Right.
Is sentimentality. And maybe that's why it's so, to me, it's frightening. Yeah. Because it conjures an emotion, or a part of film grammar, that has been mute for the entire film, that has been muted. There's nothing sentimental or warm or even genuine about the entire criminal and judicial apparatus that's trying to hunt down and catch this killer. It's not that the criminals are after him because the killer is inconveniencing them, because they can no longer commit their crimes because cops are on full alert. And the cops are after him simply as a matter of their function.
Certainly.
Like, that's what they're supposed to do. Neither of them bring up the dead victims' names very much. And in fact, the only ones I've heard where it was Elsie over and over again. That was it. And that was one of 3, I believe. So there's really no heart in this film, which I find so scary.
Which is really true, because he even takes the idea of candy, and he sublimates that candy into, the killer, and the candy for the killer, and use that as evidence to find the killer. And they go and they look behind the bushes somewhere throughout the movie, and they're trying to go on his trail. And that's the beginning of the investigation, is that they know that the killer has candy because of the children, and he gives the candy to the children, and that sort of gives another element of estrangeness, is that even though the pleasantries that we
Yes.
face in life are sort of horrifyingly used. That's just
Oh
kind
God,
of,
there's just so many
yeah.
things that are just
And the balloons. I mean, just like
yeah.
really think about all the pleasantries that are even portrayed in the movie are still used
Oh
in
gosh,
that movie.
we can wax poetic on this entire movie. Oh, it's just beautiful. The most fascinating I find, but the most fascinating aspect of it, in my opinion, is its composition, is its skewed angles, its perfect shadows, perfect use of light and sound. It's one of the best put together movies I think ever made, and it's so autocratically or like dictatorially like put together. Like it's very strict and it's very harsh in every aspect.
Well, that's what he's portraying, because we did mention Metropolis earlier, and how Metropolis is just so thematic and sort of overture, and this sort of the Messiah concept and the salvation and all of this, and this is instead M is instead made into this sort of seriousness, which is so embedded and ingrained in German culture. And I would have to speak from knowledge of that, because I am partially German myself, and
And I'm very Jewish.
but it's just, I think it's just, it really spoke to the German culture, and then it just came out as one of those elements which made it even that much greater, is showing the seriousness of German culture and bringing that out into light, and to the culture of despair which is happening.
Right. Modern anxieties.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh man.
And then they mention in the film about the depression,
They
and how
do.
so
And you see the effects of it.
and that is how that particular part where they mention the depression is when I started getting on the trail myself in my own narrative of the fact that he was alluding to the Third Reich.
Long shadows his symbolism. He cloaks them like in very nuanced ways, but he wants you to follow along. So
Absolutely.
he gives you several
Multiple
different threads to follow at several different parts of the film. Even if you don't catch on until the last 15 minutes, there's still a new thread. Like, oh, now I'm starting to understand exactly what he means. Because he wants people to follow along, but at the same time, he wants the incorrect people, the censors of the time, the Nazi censors, to be completely blind to the overall message. So he gives them false threads. And that's what I mean, though. There's so many different things in this tapestry, this masterwork. It's really one of the most complex movies ever made without being pretentious, even in the
slightest. That's what's beautiful about it, is you can take it as either a mob classic and at surface value, and it has just the true elements of that, and it just created that sort of entire genre. And that alone has surfaced all the way to Scarface.
Yes.
And that goes all the way, like that's just like 40-50 years of mob movies, and that the fact that he was inspirational in that respect. And then it goes off into this entire other thematic overture of his culture and his critique of that culture. So just
making a localized geography universally anxious, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and that just getting back to that, the whole irrationality of everything, how they're, especially in the before the middle, but they're trying to get onto the lead investigation, how they're trying to go through every avenue of getting to the killer and figuring out who the killer is, and they detain 1,400 people, was it? That's what blew my mind, is how that many people went to the precinct. And it's just like, that was the level of desperation.
And the criminals are the ones who end up catching him.
Yeah. That's just great. And they use the beggars, right?
They use the beggars.
The beggars guild.
And the balloon salesman, the blind balloon salesman, recognizes the whistling, and that's how it...
And that's the greatest part, is that the blind guy of all the people is the one who figures it out.
What do you think... one more thing I do want to ask about No, finish your thought.
Yeah, the beggar found it out the killer at the same time the investigator did, didn't it, Loman?
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
paralleling that because that
Yeah.
was with the windowsill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was at the same exact
So
time.
he juxtaposes so many different things here, and justice would have found him. The cops would have found him if it was one more day, but one more day would have been too late. He was on the prowl that night.
And he was about to kill a girl.
Yes, and so I pick up so many different feelings. Another thing I want to bring up, just from the oh my god, the super symbolic, the immortal slapping on his shoulder of the M,
Yeah.
branding him as future cattle, as lamb to the slaughter, which he eventually becomes. He sounds like a wounded animal. That is one of the
That's a good description. I like that.
most horrific moments in film. Because you know from that point on, he's a marked man and he's doomed.
Yep.
Gosh.
And then he sees it, and but only because the girl, and that's beautiful, is how Fritz Lang was like, the girl was almost helping him escape the innocence of
Yes.
the child, and that's just, I don't know if that's like pointing to how ignorance can be destructive, almost. Because he did that,
Or
he sees
how
the people
sympathy
watching
can be
him
destructive
in the mirror.
even.
Not the mirror, the glass.
Yeah. And sympathy could even be destructive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why Der Schranker, the safecracker, and the rest of the kangaroo court maybe had to have been so absolutist and seemingly unfair. Because sympathy leads to destructive ends sometimes in Fritz Lang's world.
And I wanted to leave off on the voice of reason and the defense of that, and how his
My God. Motherfucking phone. Okay, go on, David.
It's okay. So the voice of reason is his impassioned plea, and how the entire crowd starts yelling at him, just like how Nietzsche and his works shows us how the crowd is so irrational in that respect, that they will be absolutely destructive and stomping on anything that stands in their way. And how he stands up and says, "I will not have you shout me down." And that was just wow. Just a wow moment for me. It's just how, at the end of the day, justice and truth just right there, just toe to toe, saying, look, this is the finality of everything.
It's fascinating because it's also contradictory. No impassioned speeches here, and yet he gives the most incensed and poetic one. And also, it's that speech which ignites the crowd to jump out of their seats and attack Hans Beckert as well, because it was probably just that well formulated.
And that just plays right into Nietzsche and his philosophy, how the crowd will still get what they want, despite the fact that the voice of reason has spoken and has given the right lens of what to do and how to treat the human condition. But it doesn't matter.
I think that's a good place to end on.
Yeah.
And if you want to look into this further, obviously rewatch M. Hopefully you haven't listened to this without watching M. That would be silly and stupid. Just go and rewatch it and think about some of the things that we said. Think of your own opinions and comment back to us. Tell us what you've uncovered in it as well. Maybe you have some expansions on our beliefs, and maybe you completely disagree with our analysis. We'd like to see why. And also, if you have the Criterion version, which most likely you do if you own this physically, it has an amazing commentary track by two incredibly intelligent individuals. I believe they're both film historians, but one's Fritz Lang centered, and the other one's more centered on Nazi imagery and cinema. So I would definitely check that out as well. And you're actually reading an interesting book as well. I want to give the title of that out.
The Politics of Cultural Despair in Nazi Germany, World War II.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's more fringe than it is scholarly, but it is very, very thorough in the analysis.
Well, it's helpful in giving you almost like a Rosetta Stone or a code to maybe pick out some of the more subtle elements involved in M.
Absolutely, and that alone sort of helped me to get the ideas down of the irrationality and how that irrationality unfolds itself throughout the movie.
It's so irrational yet so fucking like
It's so true to
meticulous.
the. It's meticulous because what he's doing is he's really showing us how that irrationality plays out in real life in real time.
It's an acrobatic act of filmmaking. This one right here, like, oh my gosh, it's a high wire balancing act, but it looks so sustained, so easy. So it makes it look. That's how you know
It
they're
makes it
great.
look easy. You're right about that.
That's how you know they're great. And obviously, if you're interested in Fritz Lang, definitely watch Metropolis after this. You have to watch both M and Metropolis, both essential viewing. And if you really like those, check out The Big Heat. There's another masterwork of his. And, from there, just go to Ministry of Fear and Siegfried, and you're pretty much set on checking out Fritz Lang. Also, he had an incredible performance in Jean-Luc Godard's incredibly self-referential and meta Contempt, starring Brigitte Bardot. Definitely check that out as well. And that should end it for your Fritz Lang material. And hopefully you don't end up buying a monocle. But,
I don't know. I'm thinking about a monocle myself. So
I just want you to be as interested in this filmmaker as I am, because he's definitely one of the best, even though he might be a compulsive liar. He's been charged with that a couple times. He does sound a bit heroic in his Goebbels stories. I choose to believe him because I respect him. A lot of people like to try to
I don't know.
deflate his arguments, but I think that everything involving Nazi Germany is pinned and prodded and looked at with a magnifying glass. So if he embellished on anything, people will say that he embellished on everything, which there's a difference. And he's also a filmmaker and a storyteller, so of course his stories will be a bit more amplified. I think just normally, I think that's how filmmakers should naturally be, hopefully. He's not a documentarian, he's a filmmaker. And he's one of the best. So definitely check him out some more. And following right up after this is kind of a piece I wrote for Letterboxd.com. You can find my profile, letterboxd.com/MadZack. It's a piece I wrote there a few years ago, but I'm pretty sure it's still true to my opinions on the movie. I don't know. I'm about to read it and find out, but
Definitely. And I thank you for having me.
oh, it's always a pleasure. He was on the Persona
Yeah.
podcast as well. Listen to that if you haven't yet. It's about to be re-uploaded, so keep an eye out for the Persona podcast. This probably gives you enough time to watch the Ingmar Bergman film before you listen to it. So that's probably good heads up.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening. Definitely.
Thank you very much. Once again, Nightcrawler podcast. Exactly.
It's Joseph.
All right. Okay.
It's
So
Joseph is his first name, right?
yeah, Joseph is his first name. I wrote this piece back in 2014, so that's a considerably long time ago, but this does bring up certain aspects I definitely forgot to mention. In fact, the first word in here is Kafka-esque, which definitely didn't mention in the conversation. This is a definitely Kafka-esque film. If you've read The Trial by Franz Kafka, it has so many parallels with that. It's not as absurd as that. This apparatus runs as like a clear machine with clear purposes and intents, which might make it opposed to the Kafka-esque idea. But the fact that it's an entire city and population all working together to one kind of heartless or emotionless goal is definitely applies to M. But Fritz Lang might be the greatest total control director to have ever lived. He is also one of the most stylistically contradictory. Lang's work is seemingly mechanical, closed and static, operating in the realm of the preordained, strictly choreographed to the point of rigid confinement. His characters seem fixed, immutable, cursed to the only destiny the film allows for them, but Lang is also incredibly manic. Expressionism morphs into poetic realism and noir. Characters seem at war with their fixed destinies, and the story is as sardonic as a spoiled god. Lang's characters are the brats that defy the titan of certainty. His heroes are the ones who rebel against the parameters of the story that defines them. Lang's world is a place of order, and his stories seek to tame those who defy it. It is his style that mystifies, his attitude that heightens his use of language, his dialect of tone and theme, and his individuality is a constant presence throughout his strictly controlled films. We are often thinking of fairy tales or parables when we watch the films of Fritz Lang, of allegory, but in only a way that Franz Kafka could possibly understand them. M is Lang's masterpiece, and it's the most haunting film ever made, arguably. It's a guttural experience, visceral and peeping. The images of M have stayed with me forever. A would-be victim's frame is outlined by a gleaming display of knives, a golden triangle of despair and inescapability, a slapped M on a shoulder, a cattle sphere he is branded by society. They know it was written one should be loyal to his role. It was written you cannot outrun judgment. His destiny was written in cobblestone and shadow. It is an inescapable fate. The early sound films were of the highest artistic accomplishments, in my opinion, when sound was originally used as a weapon, as a signifier, holding the keys, jangling and effervescent, used so skillfully that we feel engulfed by the absence of sound rather than in want of its security. Long used sound as a weapon so exact and with a touch so profound and knowing, capable of eternity and weight of nothing. The sounds of M haunted me deeply, and they will echo in my mind forever. Long's vision was so complex and perfectly imagined, full of longing and apprehension, that M is a deconstruction of a genre that it was in the very presence of creating. Long was one of the few absolute geniuses of film. M is not only evidence of his genius, but the definition of the title itself. And M flows, doesn't it? Long takes us by the hand and guides us through this labyrinthian underworld of order and testimony, leading us to its sweaty, hungry heart, to the primal beating of the labyrinth's steel drum. Under the surface, beneath its skin, the city comes to life by way of shadows and cobwebs and German expressionism. The soul of a child murderer is revealed in all its humanity, all its gross humanity, by way of persecution. The city's heart beats, beats, beats. Its story? Timeless. Fritz Lang's M is one of the most amazing films ever made. It is by far one of the most perfect. By way of empathy, the film is a ghost. It haunts and stirs and feels, made so effectively, Lang's direction being pure and distinct, succinctly visualized and graceful. This is what pure cinema is all about. Images, sounds, and ghosts, those fostered fragments, the offspring of pure cinema. It is in the images of M that we are spellbound. In its sounds, we are startled, but it is the ghost of M that we build a relationship with. It is the ghost that never fades. That was what I wrote about M a few years ago, and I believe that still rings true to me today. So, in finality, thank you for listening to the Nightcrawler podcast. We're going to be exploring some more art house films like these. I know we got hopefully Solaris and La Dolce Vita, and I'm sure an Antonioni film on the horizon. I'm sure Polanski isn't too far away either. Might not tackle Kubrick for a while, but just stick around and we'll definitely be covering some interesting filmmakers. Thank you for listening. Mad Zach. I want to thank the Delirious David for coming in and ripping apart this movie with me and really getting down to the core fundamentals of understanding Fritz Lang's cinematic grammar. Thank you guys for listening and have a great day.